off with very complicated sugar, which is the last line before the Mishnah. Rashi learns if the chalada happened at the first third, it's for sure not good. Huadin with higrim and other psulei shchita, and the shaila here is but a last third. Tosfos strongly argues with that. The Rivam argues and says no. Of course, in the first third it's not a problem. Of course, in the final third it's not a problem. The whole shaila was only on the first third, and it was only by chalada, not by other psulei shchita. So that's a big nafkamina l'halacha in the kashrus of shchita. Okay, Gavalti. We are up to the Gemara on Lamed Aleph and Amud Aleph, the two dots about 8 lines down. Hoya shoichet v'hitis. So if you were shechting and you got through the whole neck, so meaning someone was shechting and he was either only moilech or only maybe, or so either only moilech as an outstroke, or maybe he went one way in one direction and he cut through both simonim. So the Mishnah says if it's kamolei tzavar, if the knife is kamolei tzavar, the shchita is ksheira. Ibeilu. So the Gemara wants to know molei tzavar v'chus l'tzavar kamolei tzavar. Does that mean it has to be the width of two necks? So let's say the diameter of the neck is 12 inches. Does the socket need to be 24 inches? So you could pull it to yourself and you'll have 24 inches of blade available. So therefore, in one direction, you'll be able to shaft. The havlu trade tzavari, because now the knife is the length of two necks. Or maybe you just have to be a little bit more than the width of a neck. So if the diameter of the neck, once again, was 12, maybe you only need a knife that's 13 inches, and just pulling it to yourself a little bit would be a good shchita. Thank you very much. Let's look at the next case in the Mishnah. What are you shechting two animals at the same time? And the same thing occurred? Now what does it mean over there? If it just means a 12-inch knife to shech two animals, in the earlier case by one behema, we needed at least a mashu extra, right? In the two stones, either we needed 12 inches extra or 1 inch extra, but you definitely needed something extra. Are you going to suggest be a total of 36 inches of the knife would be required for such a scenario? You need one extra molei tzavar in addition to all the necks that you are shechting. Shema amina. This that we have an issue that if the whole head got cut, both someone got completely cut with one movement, that's only a consideration if you only moved in one direction. That's when you need this extra long knife. But Dr. Mishnah, if you're going back and forth, even if it was a tiny little knife, maybe an inch wide, like a razor blade, as long as you're constantly moving back and forth and you're sliding back and forth, that would be a kosher shchita. Amar Abanasha be'izmol she'ein lo karnayim, because the Mishnah says even if it's something as small as an izmol, which is like a little scalpel. So Rashi tells us that when they made these scalpels, they used to make two decorative horns on either end. Now, such an ismil, if you're moving back and forth with the two spikes at the end, the two little horns at the end, would grab the simonim and make ikar. So, of course, we're speaking about an ismil that's perfectly smooth, that doesn't have these spikes sticking in. Parade of Avia l'Rav Menashe. Machtomai. What about a needle? So you go back and forth with the point of a needle. Omerlei. So a machat seems to be an even smaller point than a razor blade. You only have a pinpoint rather than an inch. Amalei machta mivza baza. As you're sliding it across, says Rashi, kishamalach maybe mitoch shu chad, since it's very sharp, it's a point. Huneke v'kareya. It's going to tear the siman v'lechoydich. So that wouldn't be acceptable. How about machta the ushbechi? Now, what's unique about a machta the ushbechi, the furriers used to use it, and yes, it came to a point it was an awl, but its sides were also very sharpened. So maybe that would be good if you move it back and forth. My. The Mishnah says even a tiny little blade will be kosher. So this type of awl, AWL, should be appropriate. Talk to Gemara. My love, when it says afilu kosher in our Mishnah, let's say it means to include machta do'ushachi. Talk to Gemara, Lord, Ismail, it's referring to an Ismail. What do you mean? Ismail behedja katanila. Ismail is specifically listed in the Mishnah. So when it says kosher, it can't be referring to the Ismail, obviously it's referring to the awl. No, not necessarily. Perusha kamafarish. Maybe the Ismail is giving an example to say that. Because right off the bat, what's a bigger chiddush? An Ismail that has a blade that's an inch long, or an awl that also comes to a point? It's a much bigger chiddush that the awl that comes to a point would be kosher. So therefore, it's mistaber that it's just pirusha kamafarish. If you hold in the Mishnah kosher, it meant machta the ushkafi, it meant like a pinpoint almost. Hashta machta the ushkafi shari. If the Mishnah is being matter, something that comes to a point, Ismail miboy, do I need a Mishnah then to list off as an explanation of kosher Ismail? Ismail is even more lenient because it has more of a blade than the after the ushkafi. So therefore it must be that it's just a pirush kamafarish. So no, Ismail is trichalei. Maybe the after the ushkafi is included in kosher, and it's only to say Ismail. It's a bigger blade, true, but it has another chesaron. So kedai dechamina ligzer Ismail she'ein le karnaim atu Ismail she'esh le karnaim. But there are some Ismails that are not good for shchita, like those ones that have those decorative points. Maybe you would have thought that you're not allowed to use any Ismail at all because you might mix up and use the wrong Ismail. So maybe that's why the Mishnah to speak out Ismail, even though it's a smaller chiddush, that it's a good knife for shchita than machta d'ushkafi, but it has a unique twist to it that makes it a chiddush, and that is the Mishnah has to tell us that you could use an Ismail if it doesn't have kanaim, and we won't be concerned that you might mistakenly use an Ismail sheish lekanayim, kamash shemalam. That's what the Mishnah teaches us. Therefore, we don't have a raya. It will be possible. Shenemar, the pasuk says, "V'zavachta v'yachalta." Ma she'ata zevech, what you make a zvicha on, atoicha. So the reason why we're saying that this wasn't a good shchita is because it was completely on its own. Nafla, fell by itself. No human intervention. Pilahu, what if you were holding a knife and you purposely dropped the knife? You had no intention to do a shchita, but you had an intention to drop the knife, or you knocked the knife off the table. Kshera, that would be a kosher shchita. That's enough of a human involvement to be matir shchita. Even though you didn't have kavana to do a shchita. Man Tana the loiba inon kavana l'shchita. Who is the Tana who we know says you don't need kavana? Because the way we're trying to learn this Mishnah, the way we're trying to be medayik from this Mishnah, is that shchita without kavana would be a good shchita. As long as you have kavanah to drop the knife, but you don't have kavanah to do a shchita. Amar Rab Nosni. This Tanya Rab Nosni, we actually learned about him already. The Tanya Oishia Zeira, the Min Chavaya, little Oishia from the Chaver. Where does that name come from? Oishia Zeira, the Min Chavaya. Rashi says, Zeira Yeshiva. He was from the youngest in the yeshiva. V'linira Zakt Rashi, the Oishia Zeira Hayanikra. His name was Oishia Zeira, little Oishia. The Min Chavaya Yeshiva Ben Yeshiva. So his name was Oishia Zeira. And he was from the yeshiva. So it's not Oishia, comma, Zeira the Min Chavaya, the young guy from the Chaver. His nickname was Oishia Zeira. And therefore, and the Min Chavaya is just telling us where he's from. Zorak Sakin Lemeretabakaisa. Someone is playing target practice. He's shooting knives, he's throwing knives at a target. V'hocha v'shachta kedarka. And somehow the neck of an animal got in the path of the knife, and the knife perfectly shechted this animal. So that was a kavanah l'zrikas hasakin, but there was no kavanah for shchita at all. And Rab Nosson machshir, Rab Nosson is machshir. This is the shita that Rav is saying is also consistent with our Mishnah. The Chachamim Poislim, the Chachamim would be possible. You need to have kavanah to shecht. Zogt Gemara, who Tani law? He quoted this. So Rava quoted it. Oishia Zeira quoted it, and Oishia Zeira added that who Amar lo halacha Rab Nosson, and he told us that we paskin like Rab Nosson l'kula that you don't have to have kavanah l'shchita. Frag the Gemara, why did I need Rava to be medayik this halacha like Rab Nosson from our Mishnah? Rava was already medayik from a different Mishnah, the halacha of Rab Nosson, that you don't need kavanah b'shchita. Rava already made such a diak. The Tanan, we learned in the very first Mishnah of our Masechta, if any psulei shchita shechted, including a cheresh, shoyte v'katan, v'acherim ra'inaisan, and they're being supervised, shechita san kshera, their shchita will be kosher. And right over there in the first parak of Amina we asked, man tanid l'bei kavan l'shchita. If a cheresh, shoyte v'katan could shecht, clearly you don't need kavanah because they're not capable of having kavanah. V'yomer Rava, and Rava told us at that point already, Rab Nosson he. So we already have a Mishnah in our Masechta that already illustrates the Shita of Rab Nosson, that you don't need kavanah l'shchita. Zokma Tricha Rava needed to teach us this, Sai in the first Mishnah, and Sai in this Mishnah over here. Yashmin Hasam, if we only knew that the shchita of a cheresh, shchita v'katan is kosher, even though they don't have proper kavanah, they might, a cheresh shchita v'katan might not have sophisticated enough das to know they're shechting l'shem shchita, but they know they're cutting something. So maybe there, Rava says that Rab Nosson in that case would agree it's kosher. Here, there's no kavanah for even to cut. You just drop the knife. You might think that that's not adequate kavanah, even to satisfy the threshold of Rab Nosson. So Rava tells Rab Nosson knows you don't need kavanah l'shchita at all. You just need kavanah to move the knife. And if Rava only taught us this halach over here, I would tell Mishim de Ka'asi Mikoich Badas. At least whatever lack of kavanah there is, but there is a kosher sheichet that's moving the knife. I will also the Ka'asi Mikoich Bendas. But there, the whole person doing the shchit is not qualified, so maybe the whole issue doesn't even begin to be considered. That's why Rava told us, Sai in our Mishnah and Sai in the first Mishnah, that this is consistent with the Shita of Rab Nosson, that you don't need kavanah l'shchit. Just kavanah to move the knife is enough, and even a person who's not a ben das would also be adequate to do the shchita. Zok the Gemara, Itmar, Nida shenen tzav. A woman who didn't go into the mikveh willingly, she went in against her will. Now, the Gemara is going to tell us later exactly what was the scenario, what happened that she went in against her will. So the main thing is she obviously did a tefillah without kavanah because she went in without knowing. She didn't go in, so she didn't go in. It's a felt kavanah. Physically, she got wet. When her brother was pushed into the mikveh, he came out very wet, but he didn't have kavanah to table. So Amar B'Yudah Marav, Tahora Levesa. She's Torah to her husband. She could live with her husband because that's chulin. But vasura nechal b'truma. But she would not be able to eat truma because in order to be tahor with a tefillah for the sake of eating truma, you have to have special kavanah that I'm toiveling myself for truma. Right? We know the halach is if someone toivels themselves because they want to be matar themselves to eat chulin that they're trying to eat b'tahara, that's not a good tefillah for truma. For truma, you have to have special kavanah that I'm toiveling to be tahor for truma. Rabbi Yochanan Omar, Rabbi Yochanan says, "Af levesa lo tiara." Rabbi Yochanan said, "No, it's not even a good tefillah for her husband. Her tefillah is not valid. They had no kavanah." Amar Rav Nachman, L'Rav, according to Rav, the Amar Tahor levesa v'asur lechal b'truma. I don't understand. If someone lives with a woman who's a nida, he's chayiv kares. If someone eats truma and he's tamei, he's only chayiv misa b'dei shemayim. So you're telling me you need a higher level of kavanah for misa b'dei shemayim than you need for kares? Frag the Gemara, oven kares hutra. This tefillah was enough to be matter a chiv kares of boil nida. Isser misa miboy. Surely this tefillah should be strong enough to neutralize a chet, to neutralize a tumah that would only lead to misa b'dei shemayim. Amalei. So he answered back. Rav Nachman answered back very simply. There's two different things. Baila chulanu, her husband is chulin. The chulin lo boi kavana, and chulin doesn't need kavana. You know, any person who's learning Daf Yomi, she thinks, baila chulin, my husband is chulin. I licked in chulin, I went chulin. But the chulin lo boi kavana. So I imagine a guy sitting by the table, by supper, and his wife is talking to him, and his mind wanders to a sugya that he was learning today that was difficult, so he starts wondering about it. And she's seeing that she's trying to talk to her husband, and he's spacing out. So she gets offended. So he tells her, don't be offended. If I'm thinking about chulun, I don't have to be focused on what you're saying, because I'm thinking about chulun. Zok to Gemara, I don't think, I wasn't able to find this pshat in any of the Rishonim punkt. Couldn't find it anywhere, not in the art scroll. Very good. In fact, Gemara, how do I know that there's this distinction between chulin and kachim? And how do I know that by chulin you don't need kavanah? How do I know that chulin doesn't need kavanah? The Tanan we learned, gal shenitlash. Imagine there's a big wave that jumps out of the ocean, and now it's coming on me. It's such a big wave that it has a full content of 40 saw in this wave. So you're standing by the shore, and this big surfing wave comes and splashes all over you. On a person or on kalim, to hire him, that's a good tefillah. That was definitely a tefillah b'li kavana, because a wave just crashed on you. So the halach is it's a good tefillah for chulin. My love, the Brisa compares a person to kalim. Adam dumi the kalim. Ma kalim delay mechavni. Kalim cannot have kavana to become tor, to be toivelt. So af adam nami lo boy kavana. So you have a raya from here that even a person to become tor through tefillah does not require kavana. Dr. Gemara, that's not a raya. Mimai. Maybe there was kavana there. In fact, how is there kavana? There will be yoshiv u'mitzapa skinon. Maybe he set himself up by the edge of the ocean, and he said, I want to become tar, I'm going to wait for a wave that's going to splash me. Just like a surfer. He's Yoshiv of Mitzvah. He rolls out in the middle of the ocean, and he's waiting for that wave. So he's waiting on the shore for that wave so he can get tefillah. Maybe the Yoshiv of Mitzvah, when that wave is going to come, so that I get my tahara b'mikvah. Frank the Gemara, the Kalim Dumi Adam, instead of saying that you have a raya from Kalim to Adam, just like Kalim Dumi Kavana, so to Adam have Kavana, say my Adam Dumi Inot Kavana, just like the person needs to have Kavana to be able to toivel for his tefillah to work, Af Kalim to come Chavan Hu Adam. Someone had to place those Kalim at the side of the ocean with the intent that they will become toivel through a wave that comes. So maybe the Kalim also need Kavana. So you want to bring a raya that for chulin tefillah doesn't need kavana? Maybe that's absolutely not the case. Maybe even the tovel kalim you need to have kavanah. V'chi tema b'yoshev u'metzapa ma'ila memra. And if you're going to tell me, if the Bryce is speaking in a case where the person is waiting there with intent, he placed the kelim there with intent, why is it a chiddush? Why does the Bryce need to tell me that if you have kavanah to table, it's a good tefillah? What's the chiddush? There's a very big chiddush in it. Because this isn't a standard tefillah, this is mobile water. Rashi tells us that what happens if you have snow melting on the top of the mountain, and there's a stream coming down the mountain that's going to rain into a big lake, and you table in the stream, and the stream doesn't have 40 saw. Tosha says even if it had 40 saw, but it's zeichlin, you're not allowed to table in moving rainwater, only in gathered rainwater. In spring water, you're allowed to table it in it even if it's moving. But gathered rainwater, so snow melting off a mountain, even if it's a big stream, you can't be tabled it. So you might think if someone tables in mobile water, like a wave, which is a good tefillah, we're afraid someone will think, oh, okay, if I can table here, I can even table with rainwater coming down the mountain, and that would not be a good tefillah. So you might think I should say any mobile water, no matter what type, would not be acceptable for tefillah, because there are certain types of mobile water that in fact are not good for tefillah. So that's one option that there could have been exera. Inami, or there's another option, ligzer Russian atukipin. The halacha is, even though you could tovel, you can only tovel at the tip of the wave. So if you're standing on the floor and the wave comes and falls on you, that would be a good tefillah because you're grounded and you're being toveled on the ground. You cannot tovel in midair. So let's say you jumped up very high into the high arc of the wave, there you would not be considered a good tefillah because you're in midair. Tefillah has to be on the ground. So again, we can't let you tovel in a wave because you might tovel in the wrong part of the wave. So you have a very good chiddush, even though it's speaking that there was kavanah. Let's see Rashi. Why can't you tovel in the top of the wave? If there's a big wave going over my head, I can't take kelim and throw it up so that it should be in that arch of the wave that's airborne. The middle of the wave, it's like a dome. The Gemara is going to tell us, because that's toveling in the air, how do you know you cannot tovel in the arch of a wave? The Tanan we learned, you could tovel at the end of the wave, so you're on the ground and the tip of the wave is now falling on you and the whole wave is now going to land upon you. That would be acceptable for tefillah, but ve'ein matpilim bekipin. But not in the arch of the wave, in midair, she'ein matpilim ba'aver. So we're back to square one. How do we haven't yet brought a raya from any Mishnah that chulin doesn't need kavanah. We had two rayas and each one was neutralized. Actually, we had one raya that was neutralized. The Tanan we learned. Now we know there's a halacha of kiyutam. Pears will not able to be makabel tumah until they become wet with one of the 7 mashkin. Now, that, and even if one of the 7 mashkin touch the fruit, they will not be successful in being mashkin of pears makabel tumah unless the water was on the fruit that the bailim wanted it to be there. If I didn't want my fruit to get wet and they got wet, they're not huksha l'kabel tumah. So here we have an interesting scenario. Fruit fell by mistake into a little brook, into a little stream. Upashat mishiyad of tameos v'natla. And somebody who had tamei hands stuck his hands into the stream to get the pears out. I don't want them to be wet. So he pulls them out. He didn't have kavanah to tovel his hands, and he didn't want the pears to get wet. He just stuck his hands in to pull the pears out of the water. He didn't want them to be wet. So Pashat Mishi Yadav Tameos V'Natlan Yadav Tairos, his Yadayim will be tar, even though he had no kavanah to do tefillah. But Upeiros Einon B'Chiyutan. But the pears are not B'Chiyutan, they're not Hukshar, because he never wanted the pears to get wet. V'Im B'Shvil Sheyutchu. What if the pears fell in to the brook? And he said, you know what? I need to tie up all my hands anyway. I might as well take the pears out while I'm toveling. So then, Yod of Tires, his hands will be tar, it would be a good tefillah. Uperis bechiyutan, the peris would be bechiyutan. He never wanted the peris to get wet. Zokt Rashi, since when I'm putting my hands in to take the peris out, I want my hands to be toveled, that's good enough to make it bechiyutan. Rashi explains, peris harahein bechiyutan, Zokt Rashi, umekablim tuma mikan veilach. They'll be huksher, even though I didn't really want the peris to get wet. The achshiva lahach nefilas peris litel yodav bag ba'ason. He sort of validated the peris falling into the water because he's using that as an excuse to put his hands into the water to tovel them. And therefore this qualifies as huksher l'kabel tuma v'havale mashkes as sofer l'rotzen. Surely when the peris fell into the water he was not happy about it. But now that he's said, okay, no, if I'm going to pick up the pears, I can tovel at the same time. So now he's happy that the pears are in the water because it's participating in what he's trying to do. Tanan we learned, Kol mashka shesayfa l'rotzen. Even if at the end of the day he's going to be happy that the mashka is there to tovel his hands, even though he didn't want the pears to fall in, mashka will still be mashka. So this seems to indicate that even though there was no kavanah to tovel, because in the first case it says upeshat mishiyadav tameis v'notlan, but he had no kavanah to tovel them, his hands will be tar. So you see, Tevilla l'chulin will be a good tefillah. Gewaltig. So that's our makar that Tevilla for chulin does not require kavanah.
Even worse, he has to take off his clothes, so then he shows...
No, we're just talking about his hands.
Here we're talking about his hands. Back the whole thing. He has to take off his clothes, so that shows he has intent.
Oh, so you're telling me just the fact that he was not dressed?
Then it wouldn't work anyways, because it would be all covered.
Well, what if he was wearing loose clothing? Right, like a typical bathing suit. Unless you're wearing a speedo, a typical bathing suit. If you swam,
that wouldn't be good.
It would be good. A speedo.
Loose hanging.
That's right. As a matter of fact, it's a chatzitza on the meat of the guf. So midoraisa that would be a kosher tefillah. That's why sometimes when people are marrying into a family that maybe in the earlier generations they were not from, there's always a question: is this child, either a husband or a wife, is he a product of an Issachar? Is he a product of an Ida? Right? There's a pagam in that. People don't want to marry a girl or a boy who might have come from a woman that was an Ida. But Reb Moshe Paskins, since the vast majority of people go swimming, and if you know this person used to go swimming, then you don't need to worry, because chances are they once swam in a lake or something, and it would have kashed them. Now, don't pass anything based on what I'm saying. You have to look at the tshuva of Reb Moshe, but Reb Moshe relies very much on women swimming to be a kosher tefillah, even though they're wearing bathing suits. Right. Zog to Gemara. Esei Rava l'Rav Nachman. There's a famous tshuva from Reb Moshe where a girl wanted to marry this boy, but there was a big chshad. This boy's mother didn't go to the mikvah, and they didn't know if they should do the shidduch, and they asked Reb Moshe. So Reb Moshe explains, just because a woman didn't formally go to a mikvah, that doesn't mean she was an Ida. It's very possible that she went swimming. And he says, the Gemara tells us that one of the indications of a Vlad Pogam is he's not a fine person. And since you're telling me that this perspective chosen is very fine and very refined, so you have an indication, a proof, and the fact he's not the child of an Ida, and therefore you should absolutely marry him. Zok to Gemara weiter. Esei Rava l'Rav Nachman. Toval l'chulin. What if someone toveled with the intent that he wanted to be tahor, to eat chulin b'tahira? V'hochzuk l'chulin. And now he was, hochzuk means nischavin b'shas tefillah l'kach. So when he was toveling, he had specific intent that I'm going to be tahor to be able to eat my chulin b'tahira. Also the meiser, if he wants to eat meiser based on that tefillah, he may not, because his kavanah was with the intent of chulin only. Zogt Gemara, hochzak in la hochzak loy. The word hochzak means he intended to be mitayr himself for chulin. So you have arrived from a punkt from what we're saying, that in fact tefillah even for chulin requires kavanah. Zogt Gemara, hachi kamar. This is what it means. It doesn't mean he needs to be huchsuk in order to be kosher for chulin. He doesn't have to have any kavanah. All the Bryce is saying is, even if you did have specific kavanah, but your specific kavanah for tefillah was for chulin, it wouldn't be a good tefillah for meiser. The Mishnah there also says, what if he toveled without any kavanah at all? It's ke'ilu lo tovel. It's as if he didn't tovel at all, meaning it wouldn't even be good for chulin. Don't you have a raya from here that chulin, tefillas chulin requires kavanah? My love, ke'ilu lo tovel klal. So it's ke'ilu lo tovel a meiser. It just means his tefillah would not be valid to allow him to eat meiser. Aval tovel l'chulin. But it's good tefillah for chulin because tefillah l'chulin requires no kavanah at all. So when Rava asked his kasha to Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman brushed it off by saying that Torah hochsak, meaning only the Gabi Meiser, that you can take that as a shtickle dachuk, because it says Kilo Tova. Zok to Gemara, who savar the chuyu kamat chalei. Rava thought Rav Nachman was just trying to push him off, and with that explanation of the brisa. But Nofak Dok Va'ashkach. Rava went out and looked for other Mishnayos to see if he can find corroborating Mishnayos that if you were tovel without any kavanah till kosher l'chulin, and he found one. The Tanya Tova v'lo huchsak muter l'chulin v'asur l'maiser. So he sees clearly, even if he had no kavanah at all, it's still muter l'chulin, which is very consistent with how Rav Nachman explained away the first brisa that we quoted. Amar Abai Rabbi Yosef. Abai asked Rabbi Yosef a kasha. Lema tahavo tiyufte Rabbi Yochanan meha. On Amar Aleph, we had a shaila of someone toveled if a woman was nensod b'tfiloso, she toveled without kavanah. Rava said that she's kosher l'bayla. She's just usher to eat meiser. But Rabbi Yochanan said af l'bayla l'tova. Rabbi Yochanan, she wasn't tovel. We seem to have a raya from here. So shouldn't you have a raya from here that she should be mutar l'bayla? Yet Rabbi Yochanan said she's usher l'bayla. On Malay, Rabbi Yochanan could answer, no problem. That brisa that you said, Tava v'lahosok is mutar l'chulin, that's a shitas yachid who we don't hold like. Who the Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Yosef. The brisa that says Tevilla l'chulin doesn't need kavanah is Rabbi Yochanan ben Yosef. We don't hold like him. What does Rabbi Yochanan ben Yosef say? It says v'chubas. Let's look at the words of the pasuk. It says in the pasuk, v'habeged oya shesi oya erev oikol kliya or. We're talking about a keli, I think that was becoming tar from a nega, asher techabes tisor b'yem hanaga v'chubas shenis v'taher. So it says v'chubas, which is another double washing. You've already washed it, and now you need to wash it a second time. My Talmud Loimer shenis. Why did the Torah say v'chubas shenis v'taher? If the pasuk just said asher techabes, and then it says, the earlier pasuk specifically addresses that you washed it out already. So if the Torah says again v'chubas, it's obviously another washing. Why does the Torah have to say it's a second washing? Because makish tachboisa shniya l'tachboisa shvishayna. By calling something the second washing, that means you're referencing two washings, and this is the second one. So we're comparing the halachas of the first washing to the halachas of the second washing. Just like the first washing has to be ladas, because the Torah says v'tziva hakoyin v'chibas. So it's directly with the das of the koyin to wash his beged. After beisus shniya, where it just says v'chubas, it doesn't give us any information about it. It also means ladas. Freit the Gemara, if that's where you're learning that kibbutz have to be ladas, well, go the whole way. The first kibbutz didn't just need to be the das of the owner; it had to be the das of the kohen. Imal alon b'inin das kohen, afkan b'inin das kohen. Maybe you should need das kohen. Talmud Leimer v'taher mikol makom. It's tar with a minimal washing, even without the specific das and command of the kohen. Masken floor absini barashi. Umiyamar Rabbi Yochanan. Did Rabbi Yochanan actually say that you need kavanah for the tefillah of chulin? Rabbi Yochanan has a general rule that he says, and that is halacha kista mishnah. And we have a stam mishnah that says, Utnan, nofla sakin v'shachta. Our mishnah says, if a second shechted without any kavanah, ava bisha shachta kedarka, psula, v'avinam ba. And we made a diak on Amar Aleph. Time of the nofla ha'apila hu kshera. V'avagav d'rei mechavin. V'yamin, and we said, man tana l'bei kavanah l'shchita. Who's the tana doesn't need kavanah l'shchita? Amar Rava Rab Nosani. So you see clearly from a stam mishnah that you don't need kavanah. And the Gemara is asking, if you don't need kavanah for shchita, why would you need kavanah for Tevilla? Zok Gemara, there's a big difference. B'shchita, when it comes to shchita, afilu Rabbi Yosy ben Yosef would be made that although Tevilla does need kavanah, shchita would not need kavanah. Midagali rachmana, the Torah tells us beferish that shchita doesn't need kavanah. It carves it out as an exception that it doesn't need kavanah. Why? Because we know misasik b'kachim pasol. The end of the Masechta of Menachos we learned was Minayim l'Masasik b'kachin, that's puzzle. We learned from the Tzoncham Tizbachu. You have to shecht with conviction. But that's only the halacha for kachin. Bechlal, the chulin lo be'in kavana. So the fact that Torah tells us you must have kavana for shchitas kachin, it's a raya that you don't need kavana for shchitas chulin. So there the Torah is carving it out and telling us beferish you don't need kavana. Therefore, the shchitas kosher. But Tevilla needs kavanah. Rabbanan, but the Rabbanan need lo be'inin kavanah l'zvicha. The Rabbanan who disagree with Rab Nosson and held you have to have kavanah, even though you don't need kavanah l'zvicha, l'chaticha be'inan. You still need kavanah l'chaticha. I'm sorry. The Rabbanan who argue in the Breichanan, who say that it's a kosher tefillah without kavanah, they hold need lo be'inin kavanah l'zvicha. But lechaticha ba'inan, you will still need kavana for chaticha. Let's hear Rashi. U'derabbanan debei mi kavana lechaticha. I'm sorry, I'm mistaken again. The Rabbanan of Rab Nosson, who hold you do need kavana, you need kavana lechaticha, and therefore u'dekavasa betfila machshir rav alibayu. The Rabbanan hold that you need kavana for chaticha, but they would still be made that for tefillah you don't need. Even though you need kavanah l'chaticha, but you don't need kavanah l'shchita. So zok the Gemara, Rabban need lo ben kavanah l'zvicha l'chaticha be'inan. Amar Rava b'hazakinu. In this prat, we for sure are right. Why? B'hazakinu Rab Nosson l'Rabbanan. In this prat, Rab Nosson is for sure right in his argument with Rabbanan. Miksiv v'chatachta v'zavachtaksiv. If you're going to tell me that pshat in the Rabbanan is that you have to have kavana l'chaticha, but you don't have to have kavana for zvicha, what is the justification to take such a position? The only thing the Torah says that involves conviction is the word v'zavachta. So if you hold this b'davka, then you should have to have kavana l'shchita. And if it doesn't say v'zavachta, you don't have to have kavanah for anything. But where would you get from that you have to have kavanah for chaticha? Mikziv v'chatachta v'zavachta ksiv. So mimanashich. Iba'inin kavanah l'chaticha, if you hold that it's dafka, so you have to have kavanah for zvicha, because the word is v'zavachta. Afilu l'zvicha nami l'boy. And you lay ba'inin kavanah l'zvicha, l'chaticha nami l'boy. So Rab Nosson says, I hold v'zavachta l'ab dafka, and you don't have to have kavanah at all. You Rabbanan who want to learn from Zavachta that you need to have kavanah l'chaticha ba'alma, if you're learning it from Zavachta, so that should tell you even more that you need to have kavanah l'shchita, and we know you don't need to. Zok to Gemara. Hekadam need to shenenza v'tavla. What exactly happened that she told by mistake? Zok to Gemara. Ilema da onza chaverta va'atpala. Are you going to say it was a Rabbi Brenner story where her friend pushed her into the mikveh? Zok to Gemara. But her friend had kavanah. That should be enough. Kavana dechaverta kavana ma'yosei. That's question number one. V'oid, and question number two is b'truma nami achla. She'll even be able to eat truma with such a kavana. If her friend pushed her into the mikveh with the das to toivel her for even truma, that would be a valid kavana. The Tanan hachareshes v'ashoita v'asuma v'shenitra v'daita. Somebody who's not capable of das, im yeshlam pikachos, if they have a supervisor, someone taking care of them, who could set them up, make sure that they're clean for tefillah, then if they have a handler who's going to make sure they total properly, so you clearly see that someone else can have kavanah for your tefillah. So then, once again, what's the case of a woman who was tavla v'nensa where there's no kavanah? If she fell in because someone pushed her in, there's the kavanah over there. Amar Papa Rab Nosson, shenafla b'nagesher, she simply fell off a bridge and fell into water. Nobody pushed her. She fell in. Ule Rabbanon, and according to the Rabbanon, who hold that you have to have kavanah, at least to go into the water, sheyorda lahaker. She went in with conviction to cool off, so she went to kavanah, not necessarily for tefillah, and that would be the case. So, sheyorda lahaker, v'lo nitfel, v'nofla kula l'soich hamayim. Okay, we'll stop here, and we will be mamshech Be'ez Hashem tomorrow.